Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gnomon streaming channel here on YouTube and Twitch. Our stream today is brought to you by Dell and NVIDIA. My name is Jared Krzyzewski. I'm a creature and character concept artist working in the industry today. I'm also an instructor at Gnomon School of Visual Effects. And today is extremely special because we have a monumental guest on board. And if you are a creature enthusiast, if you are a film enthusiast, chances are you know this guest by name and his wonderful array of imagery that he has produced in his lifetime. He has a career spanning 45 years, spanning film, game, illustration. He has authored books. He's incredibly prolific, and we are just so excited to present the one and only, the great Wayne Barlowe.
Well, I don't know what to say after that, except thank you, Jared. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to everybody who decided to participate in this and hopefully get a little something of value out of it. It's kind of an honor to do this, and I'm really delighted.
Truly, the honor and pleasure is all mine. Before we begin, I thought I would give you just like a backstory into my journey real quick. I grew up in the mountain town of Genesee in Colorado, and we would have to drive down to Denver to a bookstore called the Tattered Cover. And one of the kind of first books I ever remember picking up in my lifetime as a young man was Barlowe's Guide to Extraterrestrials. And this was the first book I ever remember picking up and that drew me into the art in that way. And this is still the same copy I have, all those years ago. So it has traveled with me far and wide, and has served as many years of inspiration. So,
well, I couldn't be more honored in that regard. I'm a huge fan of your work, Jared. So it's an absolute delight to know that I had some small bit to do in your evolution. Truly.
Probably not just me, but many artists across the board. We all count you as a major influence for all of us. So, yeah, everybody in the comments. They're all messaging their love. So you've had a far-reaching effect on many of us. So we can't thank you enough.
Little did I know that a book that I did so many years ago would have that kind of impact. You know, it'd be impossible to know that.
Yeah, you didn't sense anything like that when you were making it. It was just
No, I really didn't. To me, it has a strange evolution on its own part. Well, here's a little backstory for me. My parents were both natural history illustrators.
that's right.
Okay, so I grew up looking over their shoulder, essentially watching them work. They worked in a very different way than I work now, or even when I first started out. They were using opaque watercolor and doing very scientifically accurate work. But that layered itself into who I am today. That urge for accuracy and precision, and keeping your edges clean and all the rest of that stuff. I did learn that on their knee, as it were. But I remember very distinctly coming up with the idea for Barlowe's guide when we were out having lunch. I think I was at some kind of, I don't know, German bratwurst place or something, and I was having one of my first beers or something along those lines. And I turned to them and I said, this is a crazy idea, but what about, I loved science fiction. I was reading it like massively. I said to them, what about blending what you do and what I do? I'll do a field guide to science fiction and creatures and all that. And they thought it was a pretty good idea, but I don't think they really thought I was going to, get anywhere with it. At that time, I was just entering the field. And so luckily I had a connection to a former art director who turned out to be Ian Summers, one of the authors of the book. And the rest is a little bit of science fiction history.
It's incredible. Before we continue on, I just want to let everybody know that if you have questions for Wayne, please type them into the chat. We got people backstage who are diligently recording any notes. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask it, and then we will see it. We'll make sure that we squeeze in some question time for Wayne. So thank you, Wayne. And I was thinking about that a lot because your parents were naturalists, artists, and it seems just born into your family. So was art like very clear for you in the beginning?
Yes, it was. Then it faded into a frenzy of archaeology and paleontology, which I was devoted to for a while, and then realized that there was really nothing that was going to keep me from being an artist. It just, as much as I love those sciences, the fact that I couldn't keep a pencil out of my hand was kind of more urgent to me than that. On the other hand, my sister, who grew up in the same house, my sister Amy, rebelled against it, like Lucifer in heaven, and decided to become a violinist. And she went to Juilliard and is highly regarded. And so there's some stream of something going on there. That
some serious aptitude for sure.
Yeah, and drive.
But I guess what's fascinating is your journey from the natural arts into the unnatural arts. Can you kind of talk about how that came about?
Well, my dad bought me my first science fiction paperback, and I could not stop reading it. Some of the authors that I loved back then were very visual in the way that they conveyed their stories. I think it's less so nowadays, but back then it was, I don't know, the tail end of the golden age or silver age or whatever it was. Guys like Silverberg and Brian Aldiss and a list of people. They were very visual in their narration, and I loved creatures. That just became it was a dovetail off of my love of natural history, which was a very early passion of mine.
Yeah, it makes sense that it would transition to that. So
Yeah,
the science fiction bend is really really interesting
yeah, yeah.
because
Well, I owe it to my dad on
yeah.
that one.
So you owe your dad that for that introduction into sci-fi.
Definitely. Yeah.
So
And
cool.
my room as a kid, I had stacks of paperbacks that were feet high, many feet high against the walls. I was a big collector. I still am.
Yeah,
So
yeah, big reader
yeah.
and absorber of information.
Yep.
Yeah. You have a presentation that you've prepared for us,
I do.
and we'd love to start sharing some of your art with everybody.
Well, let me push the correct button, hopefully. And there we go.
Okay.
Good. Does that go away? Okay. Well, as I said earlier, I like to begin at the beginning. This is a fairly linear presentation, somewhat chronological, and it sort of shows my growth and evolution as an artist. Something that honestly I could not probably have been anything else in my life. There's a couple of things that I want to emphasize as you watch this, and one of them is my love of world building. That's something that evolved further into my career, and but the two most important things to highlight to me are striving for originality and also striving for career sort of adaptability, the instinct to change sort of your path a little bit as the field evolved and as opportunities either closed or opened. So those are some of the hallmarks of what I think hopefully you'll be seeing here. Now, jumping into this, I spent 2 years at Cooper Union. I had learned I had learned to paint with acrylics, which was something my parents didn't do at a day camp when I was about 10 years old. So everything that you see henceforth in terms of color, if it isn't digital, it's all acrylic. And so I spent 2 years at Cooper Union, and I was actually pretty much not in the right school. To be honest, I probably should have been in a school like Noman or SVA or something like that. It was not a professionally oriented school, but I did my best to try to follow the path that I had set out for myself. As I said, I read a ton, and so working towards becoming a paperback artist was really my goal as a young man. Guys like John Berkey and Frank Frazetta and Vincent Tafate and people like that, they were my heroes when I was in my teens, and so everything I wanted to do was geared towards paperback narrative, science fiction, or fantasy art. That was anathema to the guys at Cooper Union. So this was a piece that I did over a weekend, and it was, arguably the only assignment I got that was for a realistic.
You did that over a weekend?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's a small piece. It's about, 10 inches by 8 inches or so.
Wow.
But I was so bent on trying to make a point, with them that and I could tell. I don't want to belabor this, but the teacher gave me a C, and later I asked him why I got a C, and he said because he didn't want other students to be discouraged. And I sort of said, well, in my head, F you, that was one of the reasons I wanted to get out of the school. Anyway, as I was working on assignments in school, I was doing work on the side for myself. And one of the things, the primary thing, was this character Thipe that I invented.
Right.
And so I did a whole sequence of drawings and paintings, all of these related to an imaginary fantasy world that I was building in my mind back then. And I did some etchings and things like that. Sadly, I haven't really done anything with this project. It lives in that time, but I love it in its own way because it sort of rescued me from Cooper Union. It kept me in a headspace that was relatively sane. Otherwise, I would have gone nuts dealing with what was going on there. And so this was a sequence of pieces that I did back then. And all the while, those pieces, as well as other things, were gathering and becoming a portfolio that eventually I started to take around. And in the interim, this project came along. My parents, it's the only thing that I ever worked on with my folks. They got this assignment. It was going to be vetted by one of the Museum of Natural History entomologists. And they thought it might be interesting because I was doing some fairly good rendering for me to do the wheel that rotates in there. So all the insects in those wheels were by me. The cover was by my folks. It's the only collaboration that I ever worked on with them, but I'm proud to have my name on the same thing with them. As I said, I had a portfolio going, and I sold an illustration to Cosmos magazine, and then started to get some paperback assignments. At the same time, I can't quite remember how I got introduced to an art director at Random House, but because the work that I was doing was science fiction and they liked what they saw, I went up to them, and the Star Wars pop-up book became a result of that. And it was a challenging thing. I was so into Star Wars at the time. I got a stack of color photos, 8x10s from ILM, to use as research material, which was just like I was in heaven, you know. And all the little pieces of the pop-up book had to be painted on a single piece of illustration board, which was about 5 or 6 feet long. And I had to work on my folks' ping pong table in the basement so that I could just, because I had no space where I was still living at home. I had no space to, work on it. And so the ping pong table became my giant art table. But that led to some other Random House Star Wars things. This was for a mix and match book. And this was a growth chart, literally 7 feet tall. And again, I had to work on the ping pong table for that. But this was all good, good vetting and good for me to be as accurate as I possibly could be to the material, because I loved it so much and I didn't want to be called out on anything, which is kind of a part of who I am. I don't like the idea of inaccuracy. So whenever I worked in paperbacks, I insisted on reading all the manuscripts from beginning to end, underlining all the adjectives, all the descriptive stuff, so that I could walk into an art director's office and whatever I presented to them would be at least true to the author's words. And then I felt I could go off and do whatever I wanted, creatively. But at that time, as I was entering the field, I also had that idea, as I mentioned, about Barlowe's Guide. This was the first painting that I did as a sample.
First.
And it's for Larry Niven's book. It's a Thrint. And I took this piece and I guess it was an outline of a page or two of what the intent was behind the book, to the packager, Ian Summers, who then took it to Peter Workman and sold it in a heartbeat. Now, Workman was doing sort of parody books, Preppy Handbook and stuff like that. So this, I think, fit into their idea of what they would do if they were doing a science fiction book. It became Barlowe's Guide. This is the first printing cover on it, which I kind of like. Each one of these pieces I generated, and boy, if there's ever a ruler as to when you're young, how much work you can produce compared to when you're older.
Yeah.
I was doing one of these a day. I was waking up in the morning, drawing with a pencil on a small, 12 by 8 piece of illustration board with pencil, and then finishing it up by 6 or so I could have dinner. And I did 50 of these, and then I did the interior additional detail work. And so I think I had the whole book done well within a year. which was great for workmen. They really liked that. And this is how it was eventually designed as double spreads, very much like a field guide.
I'm curious, what did your parents think when you were doing all this work on the ping pong table?
Well, this was done in my small room. I hate to admit this because I was still living at home at the time. I was, just out of college or whatever. I'd rebelled, and there I was. And what they thought, I wish I could tell you what they thought. I don't actually. I'm sure there was a part of them that thought, he's up there, he's crazy, he's doing this book.
At least he's busy.
Yes, exactly. He's not out doing whatever. I don't know. I'm sure they were proud of me for doing it, and I'm sure they understood the correlation between what they did and what I was doing. So more than that, I can't actually say. After I did that, though, because of this sort of monomaniacal focus on being a paperback artist, rather than going off and doing more books, which to this day I'm really confounded by why I didn't do that right there and then, because the guide was pretty successful, I refocused on paperback work. And this is a piece that was multimedia, mixed media, I should say, a black acrylic background with very, very sharpened Prismacolor pencils, meant to sort of emulate what I had been doing in school with etching. And it was a technique that was very laborious. You couldn't transfer a sketch down on the black. And so I just worked from left to right, essentially. And there were little highlights of white acrylic in there. And art directors liked the style enough that I got a few series of paperbacks to do in this technique. Wow. This was a cover for a Frank Herbert book, Soul Catcher. And I should say I probably did close to 200 covers, and periodically, and this is about growth as an artist, periodically there would be these paintings that would come up and become sort of paradigm shifts in the way that I looked at covers and the way that I worked on them. This was one of them. This one sort of took me to what I felt was another level in terms of interpreting stories and putting them on covers. This was the first painting I did in a brand of acrylics that I still love called Lasco. They dry very flat, and you can get a lot of detail, and the paint is highly concentrated compared to your Hyplar or Rumbach or whatever. And this is an editorial piece. I was mixing it up, doing book covers as well as editorial work, and this was a piece for a Newsweek article on extraterrestrial life. And then another editorial piece. This was a double spread for Life magazine when Empire came out. And again, it was delightful getting back into the Star Wars universe for this. And some magazine covers. This is for fantasy and science fiction, as was, I think this was as well. This was for an Octavia Butler story. And this one was too. Wow. And I did my fair share of these kind of covers, the heroic guy standing there with a tornado cropping up in the back.
Sure.
And I should say that every time I had a figure to do, I would these are for Tanith Lee covers. I would do a shooting for them because I did not believe in making up figures. So it was important to me to make sure that the lighting was right, the anatomy was right, everything was spot on. So that was very much a part of my process back in those days. Generally speaking, it would take me about a week and a half, maybe two, from sketch to finish to get a finish to somebody. Wow. So the actual physical painting time could be 10 days, something like that.
And you were working with acrylic at the time, or you would just switch media depending on what the needs were?
Always acrylic.
Always acrylic.
Yeah.
Less wait time, I guess.
More just the fact that I did not know how to work in any other medium.
That's fair. That's fair, though.
This is yours truly, a very cheap model for a cover called Last Man on Earth, one of the later covers that I actually did. And I did a series of covers for a character named Retief that was a recurring sort of James Bond in space kind of guy. So he had to have this kind of arrogant attitude no matter what happened. The model here is Corbin Burnson, who later went on to be a star in LA Law and among other things. But they were fun. They were very sort of James Bondy. And this was a conjectural piece about what evolved dinosaurs might have looked like. And this was one of the last paperback covers that I did. My elder daughter had just been born. I was going mental. Her crib was right at the base of my drawing table. And I was only going mental because I didn't know what I was doing with a new kid. She was fantastic. But this was a case where I turned to the art director and I said, look, I'm going mental here. Why don't I do this piece? And if you don't like it, I'll come back and I'll do some more sketches and I'll come up with something else. And it's a pretty small painting, but they loved it there. And because it's associated with my newborn daughter Kaylee, I just kind of thought, okay, you know what, this is a piece that I'm always going to sort of cherish.
You remember those things when you're tied to your kids that way.
Yes. Yeah. They have special meaning. Thankfully, she loves it. It's on her wall, and so that makes me doubly happy. So cool. Barlowe's Guide caught the attention of some toy developers who got in touch with me, and they were asking whether I would be able to just take the characters right out of Barlowe's Guide and turn them into toys. And I said no. In point of fact, they belong to other people. I was simply putting them in a book in a sort of encyclopedic fashion. But I could come up with other things that were similar to what was in the guide. And so I did these drawings, and they became a line of toys that Revell put out called the Power Lords. And they went through 2, maybe 3 seasons, and ultimately were steamrollered by, not unexpectedly, the Masters of the Universe. But they had a life of their own, comic books and stuff like that, and they were very, I don't know, I had a lot of fun designing, really.
Super cool.
And then after that, Barlowe's Guide to Fantasy, Wayne wakes up and says, why not do another book? Because what the heck, the first one, let's let 6 or 7 years go by for some unfathomable reason. So that became Barlowe's Guide to Fantasy. The strictures on this one were a little different than the first. The first book, I was pretty much the final arbiter of what wound up in it. This book was done for HarperCollins, and they decided that there were some titles that they really wanted to see in the pages of the book. So I had, enough say over, I'd say about half of the content of the book. The other half was dictated somewhat. But it was fun to do. The strange thing about this, though, was that while I had done a single color illustration a day, for some reason I'd lost that mojo, and these guys were taking me 3 or 4 days to do.
You had a kid by then. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, that's the difference. The one gray hair that had appeared on my head that suddenly said you can't do that anymore, but it was fun. It was a fun project, and I did get to put some of my favorite fantasy characters in it. This is sort of an assortment. The guy in the lower left is Bran McMorn. He was the first fantasy book character that I ever read, so I was insistent that he wound up in the book.
We do have a really great question. When it comes to your work, how much of the process is letting the actual process dictate the design, or are you very specific in planning everything out?
There's 2 answers to that, and that's a great question. And the answers have to do with time and sort of what it is that I'm working at. Right now, I let the process dictate far more than I did when I was younger. I was much more of a literalist and much more of a color in the lines that I drew kind of guy.
Mm.
So what you're seeing here, I wouldn't have deviated from the underlying sketch at all.
Wow.
But now the beauty of the iPad, etc., allows me to kind of be far more freewheeling than I would have been back then.
So, yeah. So you're allowing yourself to be just a little bit looser, you'd say.
Considerably
Yeah.
looser,
Wow.
actually. And now I sometimes feel like the lines are, it's almost got an alchemical feel to it, where the lines sort of take on a life of their own when I'm sketching on my iPad.
Really
And
interesting.
that's a freeing kind of feeling. It feels really good to be able to do that.
Mm.
And of course, the iPad also. I work in Procreate on the iPad, and the ability to utilize layers and to hit that beloved undo button and all the
Yeah.
rest of that, really, really critical and important. But it's part of the evolution. And speaking of that, I had gotten tired of doing paperback covers. As I said, I think I did about 200 of them, and it really became a grind and a sort of when's the next cover coming along, and paying the rent and all those things, and dealing with personalities in a way that I was really growing a little disenchanted. Needless to say, I did not become Frank Frazetta, which is okay, but you do have to kind of understand when it might be time to shift your gaze and try something new. And for me, that new was dinosaurs. It was the new old. I had loved dinosaurs as a kid, probably the only kid on the planet that does. Um, and I thought, why not go back and see what I could do? So I did a couple of portfolio pieces of dinosaurs, which led to this book, which was a kid's book, An Alphabet of Dinosaurs. And in this case, I was delighted to work with Dr. Peter Dodson, who is a very well-known and respected paleontologist working out of UPenn. And we had a really great back and forth. And I was so thoroughly in love with getting back into sort of a scientific frame of mind, where I would be counting teeth and counting vertebrae and measuring with proportional dividers and doing all these things, trying as hard as I could to make things as accurate as that paleontologist wanted them to be. His name was, on the cover, well, not on the cover here, but inside the book. And, so the credibility was critical that we both did the right thing.
Mm.
Um, this is a fairly large painting of ceratosauruses, and I'll just talk for a second about the technique on this. The underpainting is, as I've said over and over, acrylics. But the prospect of taking out my triple O brush, which I was no stranger to, but to do scales on dinosaurs, I looked at it and I said, "You've got to be kidding! I'm not doing that with a triple O brush. It's not happening." So, and this was all on me. Nobody said to me, "You have to use a triple O brush." I just was trying to figure out a way of skinning the cat, and what I did was come up with what essentially was a primitive form of texture mapping, sort of. I painted all of the dinosaurs that you'll see in smooth tones, and then layered in Prismacolor, highly sharpened Prismacolor pencils, so that you could see, the tiny scales, which were
Oh,
almost always little round things. And then I would highlight them with acrylic, or shade back into them, so that they would conform to the bodies and the shapes of the dinosaurs. And it was such a time-saving thing I can't even express. This painting took a while, but a painting like this, again, was about a week's worth of work. And all the scales are there, and it made me very happy to see them. This particular painting of an oviraptor, mongoliensis, is a favorite of mine, because not only do I like the yellow background, but that's neither here nor there. This was an instance where I looked at the dinosaur skeletally, and I looked at its skull and thought that there was a congruence between it and crab-eating monkeys, I think from Gibraltar, or macaques, I'm not sure. And so I asked the paleontologist if there were any bodies of water in Mongolia at that time. And he said, well, we can't really rule that out. And if there were bodies of water, then conceivably there would have been crabs. And because crabs are kind of
they're forever
masters, you know. And so this is a bit of a hypothetical situation that was thumbs up by the paleontologist, but to me it was an original idea based on my own observation, and I have a very fond soft spot for this piece. The idea behind all the pieces in the dinosaur book was to keep kids interested by putting in interesting interactions that might not really have been seen in other dinosaur books. Also to keep the colors vibrant and to keep the pacing of the color interesting within the sequencing of the book. This was an earlier piece that I did of a velociraptor.
Wow.
And speculating with Secretary Bird feathers on its head. And again, this is showing sort of an interaction of an unusual sort, scavenging on the beach. And Quetzalcoatlus and a Maiasaura and her young. And here's a sketch that I did for the upcoming painting. I didn't normally do paint sketches. Unfortunately, you can see it's very thick paint, but this particular one I really wanted to work out in color beforehand. This is the pencil sketch that came out of it, and you can see the marginalia there, the paleontologist giving me some notes, and that was all invaluable and welcome as far as I was concerned. And here's the finished piece.
Yeah.
And for this piece, I actually sculpted in Sculpey the Nanotyrannus's skull so that I could rotate it and get a fairly good idea of what it would look like head on. Nowadays, there's a controversy as to whether this is a separate genus or not, but that's, again, we're not here for a paleo discussion. This is a more adult book that Peter Dodson did, and he invited me to do half a dozen full color paintings for it. And this is one of them. These are Psittacosauruses. And this is another, a somewhat unconventional approach to the usual battle between these two guys.
How do you figure out your lighting? Is that something you're aware of really early on? Like, I want to do it, I want to set it this way. This is going to be at sunset. I want this yellow sky. Is it instinct? Is it, how does that develop?
It's partially instinct, and it's also well, I do use reference material, particularly when it comes to this kind of work in the past, because these were all natural settings. I don't really recall exactly, but I'm sure that I found photos that led me towards color schemes. In the Oviraptor case, I think that I just wanted that color because I like it.
Yeah. Sometimes you just want
yeah, I don't care. I just want a yellow sky, because it needed it in the sequencing in the book,
do you do a lot of nature photography? Did you do a lot of that as well? Or?
No, my folks did that. I never did. I was never all that keen or that good at.
You grew up around it, so it was probably just ingrained in you,
Yeah,
day to day.
yeah. And that was very much their work methodology as well, to use reference, whether they took the photos themselves or, we had a vast library. I still have a big library, so it's that kind of, again, attention to try to get things real.
Yeah, great comments. People love the contrast in your paintings, how everything just pops.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. Yeah. Well, I don't shy away from color. I really love using color. It's an important element, obviously. One thing I should backtrack and say that, it's through no fault of my folks, but yes, through fault of Cooper Union. I never really learned composition or color theory from anybody. This was all sort of self-derived to a degree. And it was one of the reasons that I left Cooper, because I really wanted to learn those things. They're obviously integral parts of picture making. And, that's, how do you not teach somebody that,
It seems like your skill set developed as you were growing. I'm sure you feel that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And for me, every painting that I do, every image that I do is a lesson. There are a lot of failed ones and a lot of things that I learn and take from one image to the next. And when you see later the hell stuff, it's even more sort of apparent there. After the dinosaur thing, I sort of started to pull away from the world of paleontology because I started to realize that it was every bit as political as the world of book illustration. And, I was kind of not really, I'm not a political player. I don't enjoy that aspect of careers per se. So I shy away from that kind of thing. But Peter Workman was still there, and the guide was still selling. And I thought I had another idea. I thought, what about a book of creatures inhabiting a completely new planet? And that became Expedition.
Yeah.
And this book. And this was the first painting I did. It's a 16 by 20 piece on a canvas, which was a stretch for me. No pun intended. I actually didn't normally work on canvas, especially not illustration work. But I thought, if I'm going to tackle something that's like wildlife art, I should do it in a way that's the way our wildlife artists do. They work on canvas. They don't work on illustration board. So I did this piece, and I again did a 2 or 3 page outline in this form, but it was a very free form outline without really any chapters or anything. And I took this up to Peter Workman, and he was very enthusiastic about it. It somehow pushed the right buttons in him. And so then I had a contract for Expedition, which took me about 2.5 years to complete.
Wow.
And it was the first piece that I actually tried my hand at writing on. I had a very good editor. Well, Workman's editor was not very good, but I had a very good literary editor who shepherded me through some of the writing on it. He didn't write any of it, but he was very good about the technical aspects of writing, and I learned a lot from him, which later helped me in other writing. But this book, this was a watershed moment for me. This was a book that said that I didn't have to be beholden to the traditional kinds of illustration. I could do my own book projects. And this is what I mean about being sort of adaptable in your field. If you get tired of something, but you're still passionate about something else, if you have a back burner project that you're very passionate about, you have to pay attention to those things. They're the little voice coming from something sitting on your shoulder. It's important that your passion is going to make something wonderful. So Expedition was a 2.5 year venture. There were probably about 100 black and white pieces in it. And this is one of the most iconic pieces from
Yeah.
it,
Yep.
the dagger wrist. And I did all of them on canvas. Again, bucking the stream, not realizing that it was kind of holding me back a little bit. The surface is not a fast surface the way illustration board is. And so while I am happy that I have these pieces on canvas, I might have been able to do more had I not. I certainly would have been able to do more if I'd had an iPad with me. But it was many years prior to that.
I had the opportunity of seeing some of your work at the Del Toro exhibit when that came to LACMA, and that was something that kind of stood out to me as the depth in your painting. And also you're standing right there in front of it. So I'm also grateful that you have a few on canvas as well.
Well, I haven't gone back to canvas. I think that should probably say something. But this was fantastic in so many ways, because this was the ultimate as far as that time period in world building, and it was the first time that a symbiotic sort of relationship between the written word and art was cropping up for me, and I would write something, and that would then catalyze doing some artwork, and vice versa. And that back and forth to this day continues with the Hell stuff that I've done. I guess there is a part of me that's a writer, and the written word is potent and really can catalyze, some pretty interesting ideas.
Was
This is one of, sorry, yeah.
sorry, was getting into writing also difficult for you, or was that just always a part and it just kind of came naturally?
No, it was awful. Writing God's Demon was, I still say to this day, except for what I'm trying to write right now, the hardest thing that I've ever done. It really was singularly difficult. Again, I didn't go to school for writing. I do workshops. I might have become an English major if I had not been art oriented, but by the same token, I remember seeing an old New Yorker cartoon where some guy walks into an editor's office and he says, well, here's my book. And the editor says, well, where'd this come from? He said, well, I read some books before. It's like, okay, that doesn't really qualify you. So I've always, been a little bit tepid in allowing myself to call myself a writer, just for that reason, for not having the training.
But it is a part of you, and using that part of your brain makes you a better artist. So
well,
I
think you're right. Yeah. This was one of the last pieces I did for Expedition, and to my mind, it has more of the qualities of the 19th century wildlife artists that I liked. It's funny how it took so long doing 50 paintings to get to a point where I was finally satisfied with the look of something. But this gyro sprinter painting kind of nailed it for me. I played around also with bioluminescence on these creatures, and it was I'd never seen it really used before in any sci alien creature context, and so it's one of those signature parts of Expedition that I'm pretty proud of. I'm always looking for shapes and forms that I think are interesting, and so that last piece and this one sort of quantify that.
Yeah, your shapes are so they're so distinct. That's the thing, is you can immediately identify your work because of just how you compose your shapes, and there's nothing like it.
Oh, well, thank you. I guess it's mostly intuition,
Yeah.
So that book became a Discovery Channel show called Alien Planet that I think you can still get the DVDs for. And it was pretty successful. It was a strange venture, though, into the world of television, because at that time, Discovery Channel was going through massive internal upheavals. Mm-hmm. And they had bought the show, but the various people there had very differing opinions about how the show should be put together. Whether it should be like what I wanted, what I had pitched was a sort of Richard Attenborough kind of show where, or is it David Attenborough? I'm trying to remember who does the nature narrative. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to follow a migratory herd across Darwin 4, and while that was unfolding, we would see the various biomes and see other creatures and have interactions and that sort of thing. Really treat it as a nature show for obvious reasons, because I like nature shows. And the conventional wisdom there was that no, we really need to have a lot of talking heads in this show. There was even one faction that said, no, the heck with all that alien stuff. Let's just have people sitting around a table and talking about it. And I'm grateful that person did not prevail. The show was was good. By today's CG standards, it's not even close to what they can do today, you know. But at the time, it's funny, it came out while I was working on Avatar, and
Oh wow.
little did I know what Avatar was going to look like on the screen at that point. It came out in 2005, and I was in the Project 880 phase of Avatar.
Oh wow. Can you real quick? Can you make your presentation full screen?
Um, I thought I was in. I am in full screen.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. They just wanted to double check.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's
Oh, all good.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it must have been kind of a surreal crossing of the streams to you're seeing Alien Planet happen, and then you go and work on Avatar.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
It was a different moment, you know, and I
Did
remember it distinctly.
did Cameron ever bring it up to you?
You know, it was a long time ago.
Uh,
I think he may have said that he'd seen it and liked it, but that was about as far. I think that's what he did, but that was about as far as I can recall.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, right after Expedition, I read Milton's Paradise Lost and was completely entranced by it and by the questions that it left lingering in the air, which were really what happens next, what's going on with all these demons that are imprisoned in hell, and it really got under my skin, and I decided to take a what turned out to be a 30-year detour into world building. And this was the first serious painting that I did, and it turned out to be quite the touchstone. It has a lot of elements that are visible and present in subsequent paintings. This one took me, I was working on a bunch of other things, but this one evolved over a period of about a year. It's not the biggest painting in the world, but all the stuff that's crammed into it really did lay serious templates for what was to come. So the thing about hell paintings is that, and I alluded to this earlier, is that one sort of builds on the next. So the vocabulary that was in that first Wargate painting, the sigils, floating stuff, buildings looking the way they do, the size of the demons, all of that stuff gets carried through. And as soon as it finds itself in one painting, that winds up being a springboard to the next painting in some ways. And a collection was put together of about 30 or so pieces back in the early 90s, I think it was. And that was Barlowe's Inferno. And it followed quickly by Brushfire. And this was a strange self-portrait, you know, in hell. And these are all done on large gesso board or masonite. Some were done on a really rare German illustration board that you can't get anymore, sadly. But again, these are all acrylic. And generally, this was a sketchy one. This was one of the first depictions of demons close up that I did. And again, the sigils and glyphs and all that stuff are present here and would wind up in later paintings. What I loved about hell as a subject, and I still love it, is the fact that it's an emotive subject. There's a lot more juice to the subject in some ways that sort of encourages a freer brush stroke and even sometimes more abstract approach to the artwork. I didn't feel that way working on all the science fiction and fantasy stuff. For some reason, these pieces were more about brushwork, more about me in a lot of ways. Generally speaking, with pieces like this, I would lay in a background in the acrylics and then take a white Prismacolor pencil and work directly onto the background and then work that with paint. So that was kind of the methodology. I did have a sketchbook of small sort of micron pen thumbnails, and those would generally become a full painting. That was the way I worked back then.
Wow.
But, you know, it's building up your own vocabulary for these pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the creatures that I sort of decided that hell existed before the demons fell, and that there were creatures and indigenous peoples that were populating it before the demons, and so there was tension between the two as the novel God's Demon unfolds.
I love how thin the legs are. You know, that it doesn't have to obey those rules that you
That is
probably had to
very much,
study so
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's very much the whole thing about hell is rule breaking, you know,
Yeah.
because the physics is different. Everything, you know, as long as you keep a through line of continuity, then, you know, you again, you're building on something that's almost surreal, and that's terribly appealing to me.
Yeah.
Many of these characters, once again, the hand washing the other hand, many of these paintings have characters in them that I later enfolded into either God's Demon or the Heart of Hell. And that was particularly rich and fun for me to do. This guy, I did this painting before he showed up in the novel. This is Moloch. And it was just fun to layer him in. And then there were characters that I wrote about that I wound up having to do paintings for, like these guys. These are Chinese emperors that have been converted into massive war beasts, and I wrote about them. And then I thought, well, you know, that would make a pretty fun painting. This is Sargatanas descending. A little bit of a William Blake kind of influence here, I'll freely admit. And this is a large painting of Sargatanas holding a soul brick, which Jared, you might have seen this one.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one I got to see. Yeah. Yeah, it was incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one of the largest paintings I've ever done, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which,
How,
you know,
how did it
large.
feel?
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, how did it feel knowing Del Toro was taking that around and displaying it?
It felt very good, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that he loves that piece. And
He is a connoisseur.
absolutely, yeah. The one funny thing, I guess it's funny, you guys can judge. A dear friend of mine, Vin DeFate, I once asked him about working large, and his answer was very simple. He said, "Just get bigger brushes." You know, and in truth, that really is, you know, for somebody who is used to working in a very small, confined sort of space, it did make sense. This is the cover to Brushfire and the cover to Inferno. This was a little bit of a parody on some of the Dutch master paintings of sort of medical examinations. Demons rising out of the lava. This is another one that GDT owns, actually.
Wow.
And again, you know, the freedom to just do whatever you want with brush strokes was really, really appealing. It still is. And well, I'll talk about painting, traditional painting later on, how it isn't happening.
That's one question we're getting a lot of is like the range of your skill set from drawing to painting to now Procreate. You've
Right.
dabbled in ZBrush. um, how is that process of changing the medium, has that shifted your like I guess thinking when you're designing?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, actually. Uh, Working in Procreate for me is the only thing I miss, honestly, is the tactile paint coming off the brush.
Mm.
I really do miss that, and I miss the little strange things that can happen when paint is coming off your brush. But other than that, Procreate has shaped the way that I think about art now for myself. It allows me to explore more atmospheric things than I could have in the olden days when I was using a paintbrush. There were times that I wished that I was working in oils for that reason. Sort of smooth um, transitions in paint, are much more difficult in acrylic. And so they dictate that you have to, use different kinds of brush strokes and different kinds of solutions to get atmospherics. In Procreate, I can use something if I choose that's like an airbrush. I'm not all that fond of it, but the fact that I can create softer moods is something that I always yearned for when I was working in acrylics.
Huh.
So um, that's certainly one aspect of it. The fact that I can be as prolific in Procreate in comparison to working in acrylics, that's also a massive plus. And then finally, the last thing is the fact that I can, disseminate it on Instagram or send it to a client or whatever without having to take a physical painting and get it shot expensively somewhere that isn't nearby. Though that's another massive plus that I can't argue with. Um, my book, Psychopomp, came out a year and a half ago, and it was filled with paintings, half of which were things that were done in Procreate. I couldn't have finished that book as quickly as I did had I not been working in Procreate. And I have another one sort of slated to come out with. Since that book came out, I've done close to 70 or 80 paintings. Um,
Wow.
that's something I could never have dreamt of with acrylics.
I gotta say it is also fascinating because you're posting the time lapses as well,
Yeah, right.
and I remember when I started seeing them from you and watching how you compose a piece was so interesting, because for so long staring at your paintings, you're like, how does he do it? And then seeing it on Procreate, it's still very fascinating to watch your work.
Oh, I hope so. Thanks for that. It's different than it would have been had there been a process video of me working in acrylic, but not that different.
Right.
You know, the freedom to make mistakes and to make, try experimental things while you're working. That to me is really rich.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's actually fun.
It can also be a bottomless pit of endless iteration,
Yep.
so
Yep. No, you're
eventually
right.
you have to decide on something.
Yeah, well, that degree of self, awareness comes with time as an artist. I think there's that old thing about knowing when to stop.
Right,
You know,
right.
and I think because I spent so much time in the bullpen doing paperback covers and having deadlines, that was something. Watching my folks have deadlines too, that was something that really got sort of layered into me.
You have a bit of a timer in your head.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Although there are some pieces, my wife would happily say, "Yeah, I've heard this over and over again." I'll turn to her sometimes. This piece on Procreate is taking me forever. It's just taking me forever. What's forever? 2 weeks? That's forever for me in a Procreate thing.
Yeah.
This was the first digital piece that I did. This was in Corel Painter,
Oh,
and I
wow.
have to say that Painter still has or had a better algorithm for brush strokey strokes than
Mhm.
Procreate does. There was something about the way that their oil paint brush worked that I wish Procreate could actually achieve. They probably will, but So anyway, this was the piece that said to me, you know what, you can do something that looks like your style in a digital realm, because I could never make Photoshop work for me. It
Mm.
just it was counterintuitive. There was just something about it that I just couldn't get into. But Painter got my feet wet when it came to digital work.
Yeah.
And this was
Photoshop can be a bit stiff.
yeah, well, I don't know. People that love it, and they have good reasons for it. It just wasn't clicking with me. This was a piece that I started in Procreate. I'm sorry, I started in Painter, and it was a really large piece, and it was daunting, and I really didn't think that I was going to finish it, but I liked it, so I put it aside. And then I realized later that I could actually import it into Procreate and finish it, which I did. So kind of had my cake and ate it at the same time. But I thought it was fun. I took two digital programs and bent them to my will. This is back to this is traditional, and this was a commission. This is the cover to God's Demon, which is also a rather large painting, and it looked like that on the book. And this is the sequel, The Heart of Hell. And here is the cover image for that as well. Again, fairly large. I think these are about 24 by 36, these two pieces, which is really big for me. And probably that last piece was one of the last full-blown paintings I've actually done traditionally. I started to do a sequence of demon portraits in pencil. Again, sort of pining for the days that I could do etchings. And I've always been doing, alongside all the paintings, some pencil drawings. This is Sargatanus. That's a study for that last piece. And here's Farai getting his sword. And while working on this, as I mentioned, I envisioned hell as being a real location with creatures that lived in it before demons fell, and this is one of those. This is sort of morphing into a project of wildlife in hell paintings, which I kind of have an urge to do as a book with sketches and a bit of a narrative.
I think we'd like to see that.
Okay, then I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think so.
Good. This is a sphinx-like creature. And you'll see some more of the wildlife in hell. That one was painted. I sidetracked into a project that I thought could be fun, and it was fun while I was working on it. But not every project that you do, or I do, actually comes to real fruition. This was CryptoZoo. I wrote a script for it that was one of the first scripts I wrote, and because of that, it was overly written and had too many words. But it was fun to write and get the ideas out. So I did a sequence of my take on cryptozoological animals. These are griffins. In this case, I had read that griffins originated in Asia Minor, and it was because people had found Protoceratops skulls. And so they kind of made this conjecture that it was an animal, with wings. So I threw it onto the Great Wall of China, thinking that made some sense. Here's a drawing of one. Wow. And a little skull for scale. And here's a baby one with its mom. And this project may get revived. I may do some more with it. This is a Japanese phoenix. And these are some manticores living in India. Again, very large. And this is a Tanifa, a water spirit, guardian spirit from New Zealand, which is one of my favorite countries. Actually, this beach is from a photo that I took wandering on the beach with none other than John Howe the first time I was down there. This is near a place called Red Rocks, and I took pictures of the seals, and so I was really happy to put all this together. And now, one thing led to another. Barlowe's Guide, Expedition, all these things had gotten the attention of people in Hollywood. And it had always been a dream of mine, really, to work in Hollywood, to do concept art. So when I got my first phone calls, I was ecstatic. The first job was not this. The first job was Titan AE. Actually, it was Babylon 5 third space, and then Titan AE. And those were jobs that got my feet wet into the process and what I could expect and what I could attempt to put out for directors and art directors. These are sketches that I did for Guillermo's Blade 2. Where he was exploring, he wanted me to explore the opening of the Reapers. And this was really, really fun explorations for me.
I got a lot of people freaking out right now.
Good.
They're getting super excited.
That's what we want. These were some concepts that I had for a really insanely powerful vampire that would just insert that kind of proboscis and suck the blood out of somebody in a matter of seconds. And while Guillermo liked it, it wasn't what he had in mind. This was another version of that, with a head that looked normal ostensibly and then split open. But he also wanted some cool autopsies. The only part of the brief on that was that the heart had to be armored. So you'll see a couple here that have that characteristic. But the rest of the organs had, in my estimation, or maybe I had spoken with him, I can't even remember, had to look kind of bizarre.
Cool.
Now, my usual MO with Hollywood was to do a drawing a day and to make it a unique drawing so that it wasn't building on the preceding one. My philosophy was that in doing that, I was giving the director as many choices in two drawings as he could easily mix and match. He, rather than just fine-tuning one concept, I always felt it was incumbent on me to, provide as much data as I could. So that's why I was, my attitude was to create two totally diverse drawings from day to day. This was a portal, actually, for Babylon 5 third space. Didn't get used, but it was an attempt at something strange and alien. And this is what it actually wound up looking like. These were some thumbnail sketches for the third space alien, the lower left one prevailing more or less, becoming this. This was a pen and ink drawing on Bristol board, which I think I sketched in pencil first. And I like annotating things, so these were some annotations. And then we enter the world of Harry Potter. And I was really excited to work on this. I flew out to England, wound up working for 2 weeks at Leavesden, and then went home to spend about 6 months generating ideas and drawings for the kind folk there. This is Buckbeak and a head study. These were done in Wolf Wolf carbon pencil, and I don't use it anymore. What I like about it, and it has a strange origin. When people put their work on a wall for the director or art director to look at, I was finding that my graphite drawings looked like blank sheets of paper, and I really wasn't happy about that. So I pulled out these carbon pencils, and the black from them is as black as anything you can imagine. So suddenly, the drawings that I would put up had much more presence. And I know that's kind of a silly thing, but you want your drawings to have presence. You want people to notice them, I felt that the other ones were too weak. So the thing about carbon pencils is erasing is kind of really, really hard. So you have to work in a sort of layered approach with them. And I wound up kind of mastering the technique, but it came at a price because it's a slower process. Even though I was doing one a day, it was nerve-wracking. So for a long time, I was working in Wolf pencil, but now digitally, I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, you can see the richness and the contrast on it.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic medium. But boy, if you dig that point in and you want to erase it, forget about it. It's just
you're done for.
Yeah, it's like digging a trough in your paper, you know.
Wow.
This was an anatomical study.
I remember from your because you did a Gnomon recording, and I remember you talking about making sure that your page was always clean, and
Yes.
that your line and your shapes were always very clean. You were very presentationally oriented, and I was wondering if you could talk about that kind of methodology, because it's really clear.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, that again, that goes back to my folks, you know, where they were always, or their work was spotless when they turned it into publishers. You know, it was just like, wow, okay, everything is crystal clear and clean, and you know that ethic definitely worked its way into my head. Working on anything that's graphite or carbon pencil, I always have a piece of paper under my hand. I'm always erasing to make sure that, you know, it is clean. I just don't think it conveys the right message to whoever you're sending it to, that, you know, you have to look like you care about your own drawing, you know, and smudges and fingerprints and bad erasures and all the rest of that, you know, it just doesn't work. Now, if you're working at home, of course, and you have those issues with a drawing, you can throw it into Photoshop, and I've done that and cleaned up a drawing because it was, you know, problematic. You can mess with the contrast to get rid of, you know, background noise or a smudge that might accidentally happen. I had one drawing where I accidentally got coffee on it, you know, and I was like losing my mind. And then I put it in Photoshop and, of course, made it go away, you know. So there are definite benefits to that. But if you're hanging live art on the wall, you know, you really have to make it look clean. I mean, that's my opinion. You know.
Yeah, no, it's very clean and really sharp too.
So Lupin was a character that I was assigned, and up until I came, they weren't really happy with. Well, I mean, I'm sure they were happy with some of what was being done, but they were looking for a different direction. And this drawing pushed the button in the direction that they really had been looking for, a much more sympathetic creature rather than something, you know, ferocious. So I did some head studies of that, and these were approved, and they liked them. And this was the configuration of its body, which pretty much is what you see on the screen.
Yeah.
And I moved on to do some monster books, which were really fun. You know, just messing around again with drastically different designs from one to the next. And a lot of these actually showed up in the movie.
Yeah, that's great.
I did a lot of work on the third Harry Potter and less work on the fourth. This is from the fourth. These were Death Eaters.
Death Eater, yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary. That's scary as hell.
They were fun, you know. And I took a few swipes at dragons.
Wow, that's great.
And dragon anatomy. And Mad Eye Moody's leg provided me with a few days of fun, because I thought, okay, you know, there's no actual brief on what it should be built like, how it should look, or anything. So I could just have a field day messing around with whatever materials I want. The only thing in the brief, as I recall, was that the wand had to be storable on the side, as you see there.
Wow, I see it now. Oh, that's really cool.
This one, this was probably my favorite. I wanted it to be deep blue with gold, you know, creatures on it. There was a little flask. And a brief interlude with a mer woman person. And a shark guy.
That's great.
Grindelin. And a Monkey King movie came my way to do a few passes on various characters, which was fun. I like ornate. I like building up layers of things on characters if I can. To be honest, I don't know if these were used. I don't even know if this particular iteration of the Monkey King movie came out, but I do know that I had fun doing them. Segueing over to game work, I did a lot of work on Dante's Inferno. And so these are some of the thumbnails. These are a couple of the thumbnails I did for Gates in Hell. The challenge for me here was that I'd already established myself as doing a lot of hell work, and the challenge was to stay away from doing my hell work.
Your hell.
Yeah, it was my hell versus their hell. And there was, legitimate reason for that. I mean, Dante is not Milton. Milton is not Dante. So I tried to flip a button in my head, that said, okay, let's go in a different direction. So this is Karen. A sort of anthropomorphized weird version. And this is the Whore of Babylon. She spits up this internal nastiness. Minos. A thumbnail for the Gluttony region. And I did some work on Shadow of Mordor. So these are some creatures from that. I had done work on Guillermo del Toro's version of The Hobbit, which would have been fantastic, but we all know that didn't come to pass. So I was pretty versed. I love Tolkien. My Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies, essentially, and so I was delighted to throw my eye on this thing.
Man.
These were some crazy wargs with nasty stuff going on with them. Super fun to work on, just really fun. And I know it looks like a lot of work, but these were each done in a day.
Wow.
I like head studies a lot. And before there was a Hellboy, there was this painting, which Guillermo commissioned to use in his pitch to sell Hellboy. And I was thrilled to work on it. I was a big fan of Hellboy before I was working on it. And so this, you'll notice that the hand is on, the giant hand is on the wrong hand. Yeah. You know why? At that time, they weren't sure Ron Perlman would be able to actually act with the big hand on his right hand.
Oh, wow.
So I was asked to put it on the left hand. And here's Abe Sapien, redesigned. Guillermo asked me to make him beautiful, and I tried to do that.
Yeah.
And this was what Samael was originally going to be like. He was going to be a large, almost sumo wrestler-esque thing with Lovecraftian overtones.
So crazy.
And then he became more like that.
Yeah.
I used a lion's skull for the basis for that. Working with Guillermo was a treat. He's honestly, apart from being a great guy and funny and all the things you know about him, he's visually so on point. And he knows what he wants, and he also knows how to let you, run with it in ways that really only enhance the initial concept. So it was a pleasure, really a pleasure working with him.
Because he speaks the creature language and he knows it inside and out.
Not better than anybody,
I had the opportunity to kind of sit in a meeting with him, and you just kind of absorb everything that's coming out, you know?
Yeah. It's just brilliant stuff, you know.
Yeah, truly. Wow. He must geek out over this as well.
No, he likes. Well, there were a lot of people doing a lot of good work on these shows, you know.
Yeah.
Angel of Death stuff and goblins. The Troll Market was kind of handed to me as a run with it kind of
Free for
project.
all.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was Guillermo was on location. He was location scouting in Prague, I think, and so he was gone for a week. And he said, "Look, just have fun." And I spent the next 5 or 6 days just really having fun designing characters. And so here's a side by side. I was so thrilled that the VFX house that did
Yeah.
these costumes were so faithful to the drawings that I had done.
And it's the standout sequence of the whole, you know, it's the cantina, it's, you know, all that stuff, but
It's fun. It's just
my
pure fun.
favorite
It's
part.
pure Del Toro fun.
Yeah, just pure fun. And what I love is that they all have character to them
Yeah,
too, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Well, and there's that guy.
Ah, so cool.
He sells artificial limbs to God knows what. And there he is. I'm really happy with the way those came out. This is a Tooth Fairy. I didn't actually design him. Francisco Ruiz designed him, but I did some detail work on it. And this is switching over to Avatar. This is what a page of ballpoint thumbnails looked like that I would generate for Jim on that show. There were only 5 of us working on Project 880, I think, at that time, and it was really exciting. Jim was away much of the time, but when he came back, it was terrific. Just hearing what he had to say. These were some thumbnails for Dire Horses, and this was one that kind of nailed it. He was very happy with this.
Because he can draw too. Would he ever like sit with you and draw kind of next to you, or?
No, he didn't. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't around as much as I would have liked at that phase, you know, but he certainly, you know, he would swing in and have very cogent comments, you know, after seeing, you know, a few days worth or a few weeks worth of work on the board. This was, well, this one and the next one, these are pre-digital for me. So this is working in colored pencils on Xeroxes. This one flew literally and figuratively almost as soon as I did one iteration of this, and they liked it.
And that was it.
Yeah, and I took a stab at this. This might be the very first drawing anybody had done, anybody that had been hired on. I was actually the first guy hired on the show, and this was a stab at Neytiri way back when, you know, before anybody had actually come up with anything on her, you know.
What was the brief for the Na'vi? Just tall blue people. I don't
yeah, essentially. There wasn't much to go on other than that.
wow.
The more feline characteristics got layered in a bit later.
Huh.
And I was trying to do things a little bit out there. And that goes to this drawing. I was a big, at that time, I was a big Formula One fan. And there were a lot of aspects of the brief on these creatures that resonated with me in terms of Formula One. The atmosphere was toxic. It needed some kind of reference visually that nostrils, etc., were different. The skin was meant to be smooth so that patterns and things like that could be easily seen. So I started to play around with more aerodynamic or Formula One dynamic contours. And you can see that in evidence here on one of the very early Viper Wolves. And that concept ran through many of the creatures for a while until Jim, I think, thought, maybe it's a bit too much. Maybe it's a bit too alien. And so we dialed that all back seriously. This is a Banshee Ray. I'm sorry, Stingbat. Thank you, caption. This was a creature that didn't actually get used, a Slynth.
Oh, wow.
And this was one of my very earliest Leonopteryx shots. The head down on the bottom pretty much did stick on this one.
Yeah.
And I tried a bunch of Xerox color patterns. I like what I think it was Daphne Yap came up with that. I think it's really great. And I worked on John Carter for a while. And because John Carter, that whole series of books were the first science fiction books that I ever read, or science fantasy, if you will, I had a special fondness for it. I really was delighted to be called up on this one. And I did a whole bunch of them with a lot of sort of Middle Eastern or Moroccan flavor to the Green Martians, which I was assigned. And so you'll see a few different takes on it. My primary concern, apart from designing all the accoutrements and weapons and all that, was to try to divine what would be the best solution for 4 arms, which I think is problematic to begin with.
Yeah.
Because the anatomy, the structure of human bodies doesn't really encourage that kind of thing. You would really have to work on a shoulder girdle that would be really different. So anyway, I took many stabs at it, and I was very happy with the way these drawings came out. Unfortunately, the director saw otherwise, but that happens. This is a Callet. Woola was one of my favorite creatures in John Carter when I read them.
Yeah.
Very ornate. I was trying to create a new culture, through the accoutrements and everything. So different arm arrangements, really. Did a little bit of work on Neighborhood Watch. This was one of the aliens for that. And another one. Again, you can see that I'm trying to do very drastically different configurations from day to day.
That's cool.
Cowboys and Aliens, I did some work on that one. And of course, when you work on movies, you know that not everything you do is going to wind up in the movie. In fact, the odds are against you. There are a lot of talented people working on it simultaneously. You've got all kinds of strictures imposed by, the budget, by the director, by the art director, production designer, all these various elements. So, you count yourself lucky if what you see on the screen is something that you feel you really contributed to or actually designed from the ground up.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. So when you get it, you got to hold on to it.
Absolutely, and you cherish those moments.
You really do.
This was a painting. Guillermo asked the unthinkable. He asked me to actually paint in the man cave for him, and I was horrified at first and spent a night or two sleeplessly wondering how I was going to perform in front of all these other really talented guys sitting there working at their computers. It felt a little bit like a show to me, and so I was pretty nervous about it, but I found my footing, and this was, I think, about a 16 by 20 painting, maybe 18 by 24. I'm not positive. And it took a week or so to do. I had to go to the art store, buy acrylics and all the rest of that. This was Knife Head. And I did a few others. I think this is one that you see attacking Sydney Harbor, a kaiju. And then there were some that didn't get made, like this guy. But I like him anyway. And then, to add insult to injury, Guillermo said, well, you did that one. Can you do a bigger one? And so suddenly I had to get a much larger canvas. This thing, I think, was 36 by 24 by 36 or something like that. And it took me a while to do. And I was, it was just one of those crazy moments where you find yourself, challenged and hoping to rise to the occasion. I'm happy with this one. I think it came out pretty well.
Is he asking you to paint so he can hold on to them himself, and so he can get a Wayne Barlowe custom?
No comment.
Because that's what I would do.
Okay, well, please, when you direct a movie, please hire me, and I'll be happy to do that.
Oh, you got it, 100%.
I did a little bit of work on Doom 4 before they changed art directors. This is one of the creatures I came up with for that. These are some more creatures, big, heavy, giant things, and slightly less giant things. These were fun. I enjoyed doing them. And a bit of work on Rings of Power. They asked, the brief was to do a variation on what had already been designed for the fabulous Lord of the Rings movies. And a fish, let's design a fish. And sea creatures, which were really fun to design. And didn't actually, to best of my knowledge, make it into the movie, short of a single tentacle, I think. I'm only guessing budgetary constraints there. But the variation bit was really fun with these.
It's like, I know you kind of mentioned this, but every drawing is so different from each other. Like they're all separate and unique, and yet they all have your language.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I do think I've been in instances, you probably have as well, where somebody says, I like that head. Can you put it on that body?
Right.
Yeah. And that's really the motive behind doing it this way. You just don't know what's going to push buttons in people. This was the only one of the only color pieces I did. This creature had gotten fairly far down the pipeline. And a little small stint on the recent Hellraiser movie. Getting a little more abstract. And I spent a little time doing designing collectibles. These are some foundational drawings that were handed to a sculptor in China. I love collectibles. I collect them. They're usually 1/6 scale figures. I think they're an art form unto themselves when they're really good.
It's true.
So I was very interested in making this as faithful and interesting a character as I could. It's Farai from God's Demon. And so all these annotated drawings went off to people in China, and they rendered it absolutely faithfully and absolutely beautifully. This is Lilith. And there she is, clad. And those are what her hands would look like. Those are actually my daughter's hands. And this is a Decurion figure. Sadly, I think we're going to only have one figure, which was released a few years ago. I'm not sure this company can proceed, but I wound up with some fun drawings as a result. And this is how the figure came out.
Yeah.
And you're lucky if you can find one now.
Yeah.
But I'm so pleased with it. I really am. I've got one standing behind me in the studio, and it's just fantastic. The detail work, all the surface texture was done by Simon Lee, who's a great guy and a friend, and nobody is better at that than him. So I think the blanks went off to him, and he textured them up and gave it his polish. It really shows.
Now that's a great collaboration.
Yeah, well, he's a great guy.
He is.
I met him on Pacific Rim, and we hit it off really well.
I took his class many years ago, and it was mind blowing.
Yeah, he is so good and so prolific. This is the cover to Psychopomp. That's ostensibly me on the cover because I'm the Psychopomp. And here we have segued into the digital era for Wayne. This is the first sketch that I ever tried in Procreate, just to see if I could make something happen that worked for me and my technique and, spoke to me. And it did in spades. My computer's doing that nutty thing it does. So all of these are digital. And again, I could never have done some of these pieces in the short amount of time that I did with actual paint. So I know people feel, I've had many people comment to me that they like my actual traditional paintings more. To all of you who think that, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. But the ability to come up with ideas and realize them as fully as this, I can't stay away from doing that. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off between, the chewiness of actual paint on a canvas or on a board versus being prolific enough to make a lot of statements about what you're about. And in this case, I do one of these pieces, one of these hell pieces pretty much a week. And it's very gratifying to me.
Is that like just dedicated Procreate time, or is that like you pick it up, you're sitting on the couch, or
yeah, it's both. It's me sitting on the couch with dedicated Procreate time.
Wow.
Seriously, yeah. I mean, I'm juggling other things while I do it, but I managed to get enough hours in to finish pieces with that on that kind of timetable. And this particular piece is weird. I wound up having to start this. I lost the piece somehow. I either swiped it away on Procreate or something, but I had a JPEG of it, and I had to work back into on top of a JPEG to make this work. And I'm glad I did. I like the piece, but the flexibility that Procreate offers is fantastic on that.
See, that doesn't feel like Procreate at all.
Yay. Then my work
yeah. I mean, like, if you hadn't have told me, I wouldn't have known.
That's the best comment I can get.
Yeah.
Really. But you see, things like the graded background and stuff like that, yeah, you can do that with acrylics, but it takes time. It's a long, laborious thing for me anyway. I'm sure there are people that it doesn't take that much time. But, soft focus, hazy stuff like this background, yeah. I could spend days doing that in acrylics, and that's not the case with Procreate. So, it's as I said earlier, it's a trade-off. The moody thing, I really love that. Oh, I'll have to talk to Alfred about this. Bring that piece in twice. Another wildlife in hell piece here, as is this. But Procreate can be really subtle, and that's why I didn't go high contrast on this one, because I like subtlety.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like soft, but it feels like chalk almost.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to get like a real texture.
I love texture, Jared.
Yeah.
Texture is one of my favorite things.
Yeah,
really
I don't know how you go about getting that texture, but whatever you do is amazing.
Well, you know what? I'm going to digress just for a second here, because I get a lot of people asking me on Instagram what brushes I use. And I really am very limited in the number and the kinds of brushes that I use. I use the Bonobo chalk or Bonobo, whatever it is, Bonobo chalk, and the artist's crayon for the majority of everything I do in Procreate.
That's crazy.
I start out with a flat tone that I lay in with just the broadest paint brush, and then work in with those two brushes. The artist chalk one is what I use to kind of surface map texture a little bit so that I can get a feel for it. But everything else is mostly done with that Bonobo crayon chalk. I'm sorry.
You see, kids, you don't need custom brushes.
Well, yes, you're right, but people have their own poisons.
Yeah.
I've downloaded and bought brushes, but I find rarely there are moments where I'll use a stipple brush that I bought, or an airbrush or something. It's very or a technical pen to just get something super fine. But I have to say that I could do those things with those two brushes. It's just a time-saving thing to do it with something that's pre-made.
But it's the knowledge, your ability to tell stories, how to light things, how to create atmosphere. Those are all uniquely you.
Yeah, but you're uniquely you, Jared. So
pish posh.
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of it is it's just experience.
Yeah.
This was a piece I did for a pen company. I had some pens come out that were dedicated to my hell stuff, so I had to do some package art for it. And there's a fountain pen being made in a crucible in hell, fashioned out of the demons that are being melted and thing. It was a fun assignment. These are fairly recent, actually.
Yeah, I love this one.
Thank you. And there's a lot of things that happen. I mean, this piece, for example, did not start out with that in mind at all. I sometimes will just start, working freely and kind of seeing where something will take me. And then in the course of working on it, ideas will spring up, maybe because of strokes on the iPad, or just in the course of thinking about something. Usually when I'm working on one piece, I'm thinking about what the next one will be. But in this case, this was something that evolved. There are a lot of pieces, the hell pieces, that just sort of evolve on their own. This one took a stupid amount of time. I mean, just like ridiculous. This was one, I'm sure my wife wanted to kick me out of the house on this. It was like, really? Every day I would be like, I can't believe how long this is taking. Because you can zoom in and there's a lot of crazy detail in this.
How do you know when a piece is going to go like that? When you're just going to, I can't imagine you're fighting a lot of these things, but
no, there's some fighting. There really is. Yeah, I mean, that one, compositionally, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't. I didn't have a thumbnail for it. I was just kind of. What I did was work on the largest creatures in the middle foreground first, and then I built it back towards the left, and then I added the guys in the foreground, the dark three guys there. Then I added the guy in front of them, and then finally I put me on the on the creature in the on the far right. So it was that was sort of the structure, how I built this one up. And the hellmouth on the left was something I added right towards the end because I didn't like that compositional empty space there. That's a scene theoretically from the third book, if there ever is going to be one. Sheesh.
Well, we're getting a lot of requests for a Procreate tutorial from you.
Oh, okay. Well, that can happen.
No one would object to that.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Oops. Sorry. Yeah, these are just pure fun. For me, they're you know, it's like a playground. This is one of the most recent ones.
Wow.
To cenotaph to Lucifer.
I get what you're saying about the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, it encourages me to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, all that stuff in the distance. I would have done that with paint, but it makes it so easy. You know, I know I feel like a shill for Procreate, but
no.
it really is a great program.
You found a medium that speaks to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use a lot of layers. Sometimes, you know, I've had as many as 18 or 20 layers on some of these things. You know, that it just works. Once you've, you know, figured out how that all works, it's cake. It's easy. This piece took a long time.
So much attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this one.
Yeah, a lot of people like this one. Strange. And a little glimpse of heaven with a seraph. And another angel, because people keep wondering what an angel looks like in my universe. And oops, we're almost at the end here. This is possibly an Expedition 2 bit of world building where all the creatures are plants rather than anything else. It's a world called Gessner 2. And this is one of its sentient inhabitants. He lives in a gourd-like house, of course. And there you have it.
Wow. Well, that is incredibly stunning. So wow. I'm kind of stunned just because there's just a volume of work, and it's all so unique and polished, and so it's definitely just fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
No, thank you for your incredibly kind words, Jared. You know, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we take off, is there anything you'd like to plug or share or you know, comment on, maybe for younger artists who are getting into this?
Well, I would just say be passionate about what you do. Take criticism well. Honor deadlines. Keep your artwork clean. Be as original as you can. Know the difference between emulation and inspiration. Try your hand at world building. Have a back burner project. And be aware that you're going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
You know, and learn from your mistakes and rejoice with your successes. You know.
I love that.
And you know, I also you know, I want to thank everybody for sitting through that too. You know.
Oh, I'm sure everybody was probably enthralled as I was. So yeah, it's quite stunning, and it's great to hear from you your process and journey as well. You know.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jared. Really.
Yeah. Wayne, thank you again so much for this. We have a few questions. if you don't mind sticking around a little bit longer,
No, of course.
just so we can hit some of those. I guess some questions are: do you ever print your Procreate works?
I have Gallery Nucleus has been a wonderful outlet for prints, and so anybody who wants to hit them up for prints, most of what you'll see from them is the Procreate work. I think I have another batch of 6 prints that'll be released in a month or so, something like that. So, yeah, that would be where to go.
That's great. Another question is, what would you say some common mistakes are that artists and writers make when world building?
Maybe not. Well, okay. One of the worst writer mistakes that I encountered, and it's nobody's fault really. If you're not a visual person, but you're a word person, sometimes, and I encountered this a lot when I was vetting the stuff that went into Barlowe's guide. Sometimes the descriptions don't mesh with a visual. Words can be put on the page, and I'm very conscious of this when I'm writing. It has to make sense. The words that you're stringing together. Otherwise, an artist illustrating it won't be able to actually illustrate it. I know that sounds a little vague, but you have to really think through the the foundational aspects of what it is to create a creature and a world. I remember sitting in on a meeting at Weta during The Hobbit, and Richard Taylor, who's brilliant, had this whole way of getting the artists to think about the evolution of, for example, the dwarves, and why their armor looked the way it does, and how the metals were mined, and the metallurgy, and all these various things that were components or ingredients that would eventually come out as armor. That's a little bit strange, but it worked. It was a brilliant exercise in getting people to think about where something comes from in a world that you're building. And the same applies to creatures. You have to think about, I keep harping on evolution, but you have to keep thinking about that kind of approach.
Yeah, that was going to lead into the next question, actually, which was, what is your technical process when creating a new alien creature? Are you thinking about the environment? Are you thinking about how it has to function, or is it a little bit of both? A little bit of jazz thrown in?
Well, yeah, it's all of the above, really. It depends on what my self-assigned issue is. If I'm with the hell stuff, for example, it's much more free form. I can do whatever I please, but if I was doing Expedition 2, I do plan on speaking to a scientist to get the data correct, so that I understand what the atmosphere would be like, and what the planet itself would be like, so that then I can start building these creatures. Now, there's a little bit of retrofitting that might have to happen. I might say, you know what, okay, that's good, but there may be ways around if I've created something. But generally speaking, the form follows function rule does apply, and environments do dictate why a creature is the way it is. And then whatever it's about in that environment dictates additional ingredients as to why it looks the way it does. Once those baselines are achieved, then the jazz that you talked about added on top of that, and that's where the real creativity can come into play.
That's really cool. So a little science, a little happy accidents, and then you kind of mash them together.
Bob Ross is never far from.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I guess, is there a series that you would love to work for? Is there an IP or, some project that you would love to be a part of?
Well, Dune already came out. Let's
Dune,
see.
yeah, I mean, Dune was amazing.
I would have loved to have messed around with sandworms.
Yeah, yeah,
Or killed steersmen, but
yeah.
that wasn't going to happen.
It would have been great to see some Barlowe Dune worms. That would have
Oh,
been cool.
I think that those two movies are pretty definitive. They're not gonna need anybody to do those again.
It's true. It's true. Any news or hints about a God's Demon film?
I'm trying.
These guys.
I am trying. It really is something that's dear to my heart. I won't give up trying, but everybody has to kind of realize what kind of budget you would need for something like that. I mean, just imagine doing Lord of the Rings in today's market.
Oh my God.
It would probably be prohibitive.
Yeah.
The only salvation that I can come up with is to do it, and I've actually, I'm totally happy to embrace this idea of doing it in full animation, as long as the animation is, say Unreal Engine 5 or something like that, that really would allow it to look as real as possible, but allow for those, strange things that happen, the sigils and the transformational stuff with demons,
Maybe animation, like anime somewhere kind of in the middle.
See, I can't really dig that. For me, it has to be real, and that's part of my, I guess it's why my art looks the way it does. Well, my art isn't photographic by any extent, and intentionally so. But, if you're creating hell, it should scare the heck out of people. It should.
Yeah, you're right.
And my feeling about it is, it's timely. Not every era, but we had Dante, we had Milton. It's time for something contemporary.
Yeah,
that scratches that itch.
Yeah, incredible. Well, I think that's it for a lot of the questions that I wanted to get to. I just want to thank you again for being here, for being a part of it, and for sharing your incredible knowledge and breadth of work with us tonight.
Well, great questions from everybody, but I have to thank you personally, Jared. They're really fantastic questions, and thank you for doing a great job. And I'll keep my eye peeled for all your next terrific work.
Oh, thank you, sir. Truly, it's an honor. It's an honor.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Be sure to check out Wayne Barlowe's Instagram. Be sure to look out for his books, his, all of it's available. Be sure to pick it all up and enjoy. And thank you again, Wayne, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight.